Alright, let's begin this lesson. In this lesson, I will first introduce the concepts of CNNs verbally to get everyone on the same page. After that, I will move to some visuals of CNN architectures, which will help make things clearer. Finally, I will wrap up with some GIFs that demonstrate how CNNs work step by step, and this way you will have both a theoretical and a practical understanding of the topic. So, what exactly is a convolutional neural network or CNN? Simply put, a CNN is a type of deep learning model designed to process data like images, where data is organized in a grid format. Think of images. They are made up rows and columns of pixels. And CNNs are particularly useful because they can identify patterns in this kind of data, which makes them great for tasks like image classification, object detection, and even some applications in video processing. And now, why are CNNs needed? Traditional machine learning approaches often require us to manually define features for models to use. And this was time consuming and limited by human intuition, what we thought might be important features. CNNs handle these problems by automatically learning the features from the data itself. They do this by passing the data through a series of layers that detect patterns, starting from simple ones like edges and gradually moving to more complex ones. And how it works at a high level. The first component is a convolutional layer. This is where filters are applied to the input data to detect features. Each filter focuses on a specific aspect like a horizontal or vertical edge. After that comes the pooling layer, which reduces the size of the data by summarizing the most important information. Finally, we have fully connected layers, which take the extracted features and use them to make predictions. And here we have some terms. Now we will go through these layers one by one and break them down. And these are the key building blocks of a convolutional neural network. And understanding uh, each one is important to see how they work together as a whole. So let's get started. First, we have the input layer. This is the starting point of the network, and think of it as the entry gate where the raw data, like an image, is fed into the system. If the input is a color image, it's typically represented as a three-dimensional array where you have height, width, and the color channels, red, green, and blue. And the input layer doesn't process the data, it simply passes it along to the next layers. And next, convolution layer. This is where the real action begins. The convolution layer uses filters or kernels to scan over the input data and extract features. These filters are small matrices that slide over the image, capturing patterns like edges or textures. And each filter is designed to focus on a specific feature, and the result is a set of feature maps that highlight where those patterns occur in the image. And this process is what gives CNS their name, convolutional. Okay, now we have the pooling layer. After the convolution layer detects features, the pooling layer steps in to simplify the data. Its job is to reduce the spatial size of the feature maps while retaining the most important information. For example, in max pooling, the layer takes the maximum value from a small region of the feature map. This makes the data more manageable and helps prevent overfitting, which is when a model becomes too tailored to its training data and doesn't perform well on new data. Okay, after that comes the fully connected layer. This is where everything that's been learned so far is pulled together. The feature maps are flattened into a single vector, and the fully connected layer uses this data to make predictions. For example, if the task is to identify whether an image contains a cat or a dog, the fully connected layer processes the extracted features and determines the likelihood of each class. It connects every input neuron to every output neuron, which is why it's called fully connected. Next is a dropout layer, which is used to improve the model's performance by addressing overfitting. During training, this layer randomly sets a fraction of its input units to zero. By doing this, the network learns to rely on different neurons rather than focusing too heavily on specific ones. And it is a kind of regularization technique to make the model more robust. And finally, we have the output layer. This layer provides the final result of the network, and for classification tasks, it uses an activation function like softmax or sigmoid to produce probabilities for each class. For example, if we are classifying images into categories like cars, bikes, and planes, the output layer will tell us how likely the input image belongs to each category. Okay, we will start. Let me explain this image step by step. Uh, Here you can see clear view of how a convolutional neural network processes data, and each part represents a key stage in the network, so let's walk through it from left to the right. First, we have the input layer. Here you can see shown here as a box labeled image. This is where the raw data comes in, and think of it as feeding an image directly into the network. For example, if we are working with a color image, it would enter the network as a three-dimensional array of pixel values representing the height, width, and color channels. Now we have the convolutional layer represented here by two vertical red rectangles. This is where feature extraction begins. The convolution layer applies filters or kernels to the input image, and these filters slide over the image, detecting patterns like edges, corners, or textures. The result is a set of feature maps, where each map highlights a specific feature detected by one of the filters. After the convolution layer, the output moves into the max pooling layer, represented by the purple rectangle. Pooling is a downsampling operation designed to simplify the data while keeping the most important features. In max pooling, we take the maximum value from a small region of the feature map. This reduces the spatial dimensions and makes computation more efficient while still preserving the key information. Okay, and here the data flows into the dense layer, which is also known as the fully connected layer. In the diagram, it is represented by the tall yellow rectangle. At this stage, the feature maps are flattened into a single one-dimensional vector. This dense layer connects every input to every output, using learned weights to combine the features and make predictions. And this is where the network begins to make sense of all the patterns it has detected so far. And we have output layer shown as a small yellow square at the end. You can see This is where the network produces its final prediction. If the task is image classification, for instance, the output layer might use a softmax function to assign probabilities to each possible category. For example, it could tell us there's a 90% chance the image contains a cat and a 10% chance it's something else. And the arrows, here in the diagram indicate the flow of the data, showing how it moves through each layer in sequence. And starting from the raw input, the network processes the data step by step, extracting features, simplifying the information, and finally making a prediction. And again, uh, here we will break it down into two major parts: feature extraction and classification. We begin on the far left with the input represented as a square block. You can see this is where the raw data such as an image enters the network. For example, if we are working with a grayscale image, this block would represent a two-dimensional array of pixel values. If it is a color image, it would include three channels for red, green, and blue. And next, the data moves into the convolutional stage, represented by the stacked blue rectangles here, and this is the first key part of feature extraction. The convolution layer applies filters to the input image, sliding them over the data to detect patterns, and each filter is designed to identify specific features such as edges, textures, or other details. And the output of this step is a series of feature maps, where each map highlights areas in the image that match the filter's pattern. And after the convolutional process, the output goes to the pooling stage, shown here as stacked red uh, rectangles. Pooling simplifies the feature maps by reducing their spatial dimensions. In max pooling, for instance, it selects the highest value from small regions within the feature map. This step retains the most important information while making the data smaller and easier to process, which helps improve the efficiency of the network. And we move into the fully connected stage, represented by the purple circles. At this point, the feature maps are flattened into a one-dimensional vector, and fully connected layer uses this to make predictions. This layer connects every input to every output, combining the extracted features in a way that allows the network to recognize patterns or make classifications. And finally, we reach the output stage, shown on the far right as purple dots. This is where the network produces its final result. If the task is image classification, the output layer might assign probabilities to each possible category, such as cat, dog, or car. And the network takes everything it has learned from the previous stage to make its best prediction here. Now, notice how the diagram divides the process into two sections: feature extraction and classification. The convolutional and pooling stages are all about identifying patterns and simplifying the data. This is feature extraction. Once that's done, the fully connected and output layers take over to interpret those features and classify the input. Okay, here we'll use convolutional neural network using an example that involves identifying characters like Tweety, Donald, or Goofy. And each part of the network is laid out clearly, so let's break it down step by step. You know, On the far left, we start with the input image, which in this case is TVT. The input is fed into network as a grid of pixel values, and if it is a color image, it includes three channels: red, green, and blue. Alongside this, we have the kernel. Here, look at this. It represents the filter used in the convolutional process. Next, the input passes through the first convolution layer, represented here by the stack of blue rectangles labeled feature maps. Here you can see. The kernel slides over the input image and detects basic features such as edges or simple patterns. These features are highlighted in the feature maps that the convolution layer produces. Okay, the output of the convolution layer then moves into the pooling layer, shown as red squares on top of the blue feature maps. Pooling simplifies the data by reducing its dimensions, which helps make the computations more efficient while retaining the most important information. You know, and after this, the data flows into another convolutional layer, represented by the stack of uh, green rectangles. This layer detects more complex features by building on the patterns identified earlier. And for instance, while the first convolution layer might recognize edges, this layer could start identifying shapes or textures. And this is followed by another pooling layer shown with red boxes over the orange feature maps. And once again, the pooling layer reduces the data's size and complexity while keeping the significant details. And we reach the flatten layer, which prepares the data for the fully connected part of the network. All the pooled feature maps are flattened into a single one-dimensional vector. This vector is a compact representation of all the features the network has extracted so far. Okay. The flattened data then goes into the fully connected layer, shown as squares connected to blue circles. And this layer is where the network starts making sense of the extracted features. And each input node connects to every output node, and the network calculates probabilities for each possible class, in this case TVT, Donut, or Goofy. And finally, we had the output layer represented by the blue box on the far right. And this layer provides a probabilistic distribution across the classes. For example, it might assign a 0.7 probability to TVT, you can see 0.2 to Donald, and 0.1 to Goofy. The highest probability indicates the network's prediction, which in this case is TVT. And again, the diagram also separates the process into two main sections: classification and feature extraction. Feature extraction includes the convolutional and pooling layers, which focus on identifying and simplifying features, and classification involves the fully connected and output layers, where the network interprets those features to make predictions. Okay, by the way, I hope you understanding these terms with images. Again, we have another example. On the far left, we had input, which in this case has an image of a computer, I mean a old computer. This input is represented as a grid of pixel values. For a grayscale image, it will be a two-dimensional grid, and for colors image, it would include three separate channels for grid, red, green, and blue. Again, a convolutional layer represented here as a stack of purple feature maps, And in this step, filters select across the input image, detecting patterns like edges or simple simple textures. And each filter focuses on a specific aspect of the input, and output is a set of feature maps that emphasize these detected patterns. We have pooling shown in green, and pooling simplifies the feature maps by reducing their size while keeping the most important information. And the data here flows into another convolution layer shown as yellow feature maps. And what happens here, this layer builds on the features extracted in the previous convolution layer. And we have another pooling layer here. And this step again reduces the dimensions of the data, making um, it easier to network process while retaining most relevant features. By the way, it's like pink, our second convolutional. I'm not sure, but it looks like pink. Okay, again here flatten layer represented as a vertical stack of gray rectangles, and here the feature maps are transformed into a single one-dimensional vector. This step prepares the data for the final classification stage, converting it from a spatial format to a flat list of numbers that can be processed by fully connected layers. And look at here, the data enters the fully connected layer shown as a network of blue circles, or maybe purple. We can decide it. Anyway, each node in this layer is connected to every node in the next layer. This is where the network uses the feature it has learned to make predictions. It combines all extracted information to assign probabilities to different classes. And finally, on the far right, we have the output layer represented by the blue box with labels like computer, car, dog. These layers provide the final prediction in the form of probabilities. For instance, the network might predict an 0.82% chance that the input image is a computer, and 11% chance it's a car, and a 7% chance it's a dog. And same things. Here we have a zebra. Here convolution layer, pooling, convolutional, and pooling layers, flatten layer, fully connected. And here you can see output zebra is 0.7, dogs 0.1. And here we have a softmax activation function. That part is feature extraction and classification part here. And here you can see a probabilistic distribution. Okay, and I think you are ready for GIFs. Alright, what happens here and what is that? It demonstrates how the convolutional operation works in a convolutional neural network. The process begins with an input matrix, which is represented by the larger blue grid. This input could be a portion of an image, and each square in the grid corresponds to a pixel value. The smaller white grid is a kernel, also known as a filter, and this kernel is a small matrix that slides over the input grid one region at a time, performing calculations to detect patterns or features in the image. And the kernel starts at the top left corner of the input matrix. It overlays a section of the input matching its size at each position. The kernel multiplies its own values with the corresponding values in the input grid. The resulting products are then summed together to give a single value, and the result of the kernel's computation is placed in the corresponding position in the output feature map. You know, and this feature map represents the patterns or features detected in the input based on the kernel's configuration. After calculating the value for the current position, the kernel shifts to the next region of the input grid. This movement is defined by the stride, which determines how many pixels the kernel moves at a time. For example, if the stride is 1, the kernel moves 1 pixel hour. If the stride is 2, it keeps 1 pixel. And the kernel continues to slot across the input grid, row by row and column by column, performing the same operation at each step. This ensures that every part of the input is analyzed and all the detected patterns are recorded in the feature map. And by the end of the process, the kernel has traversed the entire input grid and the feature map is fully populated. This feature map is a condensed representation of the original input, capturing the key patterns such as edges, corners, or textures depending on the kernel's values. Okay, actually here same things happening here. You can watch, and I think everything is okay now. Alright, this visual sequence or GIF demonstrates how the convolutional operation works by applying a kernel to an input matrix to generate an output feature map. The input matrix shown on the left represents a grid of pixels values from an image, while the small central matrix is the kernel or filter and the resulting feature map is shown on the right. In this process, the kernel slides over the input matrix, covering small overlapping regions at each step. For every region, a dot product is calculated between the kernel values and the corresponding values in the input. This involves multiplying each kernel value with the corresponding input value and summing up the results to generate a single value. This value is then placed in the corresponding position in the output feature map. And as the kernel moves across the input matrix, it highlights specific patterns or changes in pixel intensity depending on its configuration. For example, if the kernel detects edges, the output feature map will emphasize areas of the image where these edges are present. The blue lines in the image represent the connections between the kernel and corresponding regions of the input matrix, showing how the operation is localized and systematic. Okay, here's some math or linear algebra. This graph illustrates how multiple filters are applied to different channels of an input to produce a final feature map in a convolutional neural network. Okay, each part of the process is designed to extract distinct patterns from the input data and the results are combined into a single representation, and that may explain the entire operation. The left side of the GIF shows three different input matrices, each representing a channel such as red, green, and blue in an image. Next to these inputs are three separate filters which are applied to their respective channels, and each filter performs a convolutional operation where the values in the filter are multiplied with the overlapping values in the input matrix, and the products are summed up to produce a single output value. This process repeats as the filter selects across the entire input matrix. Okay, the results of these convolutional operations are the intermediate feature maps shown in smaller grids next to the filters. And these intermediate maps capture the features detected by their respective filters in each input channel. Some filters might detect edges, while others might pick up on the textures or intensity changes depending on their configuration. After generating these intermediate feature maps, the network combines them element-wise. This is done by summing up the values from each corresponding position across the feature maps, and the resulting matrix is the final feature map, which serves as a condensed representation of the input, containing information from all the input channels and filters. Okay, same things, but it is a GIF, not a static image. And again, here feature extraction parts, convolutional pooling, another convolutional, and pooling, and um, these two, sorry, these four pooling, convolutional pooling, again here are feature maps, and with input image, its feature extraction, and here flattened layer and fully connected layer are classification, and with uh, glowing blue and white circles or dots, you can see the data flows. Again, here, here, here are datas, and okay, you know that. And what's next? Actually, same things. It shows the connections between the previous layer and a specific neuron, emphasizing how information flows and contributes to the final output. And in the first layer, on the left, we see the outputs from the previous layer represented as a two-dimensional grid of values, and these values are the features extracted by earlier layers of the network, such as convolutional or pooling layers. Each value represents an important piece of information about the input data, and the red lines represent the weights associated with the connections between the input values and a specific neuron in a fully connected layer, here shown as the red circle. Okay, each input value is multiplied by its corresponding weight, and the resulting products are summed up, and the summation forms the input for the neuron, and the neuron then applies an activation function such as ReLU or sigmoid to the summed value. This introduces nonlinearity into the network, allowing it to model complex patterns and relationships in the data. The result is the neuron's output, which is passed along to the next layer. And same things, red, blue, green. What happens here? The input is composed of the three separate channels represented by the red, green, and blue blocks. These could correspond to color channels in an image or the feature maps from a previous layer. Each channel undergoes a convolutional operation independently, meaning a unique kernel is applied to each channel without any interaction between them. And the small pink, green, and blue kernels represented these filters. Each kernel slides over its corresponding channel, performing the convolutional operation, and at each position the kernel multiplies its values with the overlapping values in the input channel and sums them to produce a single output value. This generates an intermediate feature map for each channel, and the outputs of these individual operations are smaller feature maps which return the spatial structure of the input but are reduced in size based on the kernel and stride. These feature maps capture distinct patterns or features detected by their respective kernels. And I think we have espresso here or coffee. So on the left side we have the input, which is grayscale image of size 64. Each pixel in the image corresponds to an intensity value. To right of the input we see a small matrix, and which represents the kernel or filter, and the kernel is a small matrix that slides across the input image, performing a mathematical operation at every position it overlays, and the kernel moves across the input image in a systematic manner. At each position it multiplies its own values with the corresponding values of the input it overlaps, and these individual products are then summed up to calculate a single value, and the computed value is placed into output feature map, which is smaller than the input because the kernel doesn't cover the padding areas at the edges of the image. For example, in this case, the output size is 6262 instead of 6464. And as the kernel slides over the input image, it highlights specific patterns or features such as edges or gradients depending on its configuration. The result is an output feature map that provides a condensed representation of the image, emphasizing the features detected by the kernel. The right side of the visualization shows the resulting feature map, which retains the structure of the input but focuses on specific features extracted during the convolutional. Okay, here another example. We have human eye processes an image. The grid, red grid represents the input image, which is broken into smaller sections or patches for analysis. Each section corresponds to a specific region of the input that network examines at a time. And here, white box shows the receptive field, which is a portion of the input being processed at any given step. The receptive field slides across the input, covering one region after another, and the lines extending from the receptive field to the smaller grid on the right represent the mapping of the input features to the processed output. And I think you understand what happens here. Everything is okay, and I think I can summarize, and let me wrap everything up with a summary of the entire architecture. This is the structure and workflow that make convolutional neural networks such powerful tools for image processing and recognition. We begin with the input layer, where the raw data, like images, is fed into the network. Each image is represented as a grid of pixel values, which forms the basis of everything that follows. From here, the network begins the process of analyzing the extracted meaningful features. The first major component is the convolutional layer. This is where the network uses filters or kernels to scan over the input data. At each position, these filters perform mathematical operations, multiplying and summing values to detect patterns such as edges, corners, or textures. and each filter creates its own feature map focusing on a specific type of pattern. Next, we have the pooling layers, which reduce the spatial dimensions of the feature maps. And as the data moves through more convolutional and pooling layers, our network gradually builds a hierarchy of features, starting with simple patterns and progressing to complex structures. These layers focus on breaking down the input along the essential aspects of the data. Once feature extraction is complete, the data reaches the flattened layer where all the feature maps are transformed into a one-dimensional vector, and this vector contains all the important features extracted from the image and serves as the input to the fully connected layers. And finally, the output layer delivers the results. For classification tasks, this might be a probability distribution or possible categories where the network predicts the most likely class.